Hello and welcome back to Daniel 11 and 7. So far in this series, we've seen that the war between the king of the north and the king of the south, at the time of the end, is a war between Romanism and secularism, and that eventually the king of the north will win this war with the implementation of the mark of the beast. More specifically, we saw in Daniel chapter 11 verse 40 that the papacy will have the military and economic power to seize control of the entire world, and this was represented by chariots, horsemen, and ships. In verse 41, we saw that an attack will be made against the glorious land that we identified as the people that keep all 10 of the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, a body that I believe to be the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We also saw that many from other religions in the Catholic and Protestant churches will escape the papacy's influence, and these faithful people were represented by the relatives of the children of Israel, namely Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Even atheists will not escape the reformation of the religio-political power that will arise at the end of time to remove freedom of conscience. This will be done with signs and wonders that will captivate the entire world and deceive everyone on earth, as Daniel 11 verse 42 states that the land of Egypt, which represents atheism and secularism, will not escape. And now we come to Daniel 11 verse 43, where we see what will happen when the papacy regains its influence. So let's read this verse to find out exactly what's going to happen. It says, "He, meaning the king of the north, shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps." This text is a repetition of what we saw in verse 40 regarding the fact that the papacy will have economic and secular power. There are two symbols that are presented in verse 43. Number one, the papacy will have power over the gold, silver, and all the precious things of Egypt. The gold and silver obviously represents monetary wealth. This means that after the deceptions outlined in Revelation 13 take place, and the world is deceived by signs and wonders, the secular and religious nations of the world will give their financial power to the papacy. This submission will pave the way for the reality laid out in Revelation 13, which says that no man will be able to buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. And obviously, in order to enforce something like this, there would have to be economic control. Hence, the king of the north will have power over the treasures of gold, silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, the secular powers. Number two, it says that the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. When some Christians look at this text, their minds are immediately directed to the literal nations in our world today. And some expect that the present-day nations of Libya and Ethiopia will have something to do with this prophecy. But this is simply not the case. Remember, in order to understand the relevance for our world today, we have to find out what these nations meant to Daniel in his day. The answer to this question is found in Jeremiah chapter 46, verse 9. It says, "Come up, ye horses, and rage, ye chariots, and let the mighty men come forth, the Ethiopians and the Libyans that handle the shield, and the Lydians that handle and bend the bow." In this verse, we see a reference to horses and chariots, which is exactly what we find in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. As usual, I can't help myself, so let me give you one more text to help make this clear. In 2 Chronicles 16, verse 8, in referencing the wars of the king of Judah, it says, "Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge host, with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet, because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand." In this text, the Libyans are used as another name for the Libyans. And in addition to this, as we already saw in Daniel 11 verse 40, the chariots and horsemen were connected with the conquest of the king of the north. This gives us further evidence regarding what these things meant to Daniel and helps us understand what it means for us today. So are you sensing a pattern here? We also find something very important that I don't want you to miss. The Ethiopians and the Libyans and the Lydians are referred to as the mighty men that handle the shield and handle and bend the bow, which is clearly referring to military strength. Based on this understanding, we can see that Daniel 11 verse 43 is merely reiterating the fact that the king of the north will have power over the secular military power of the nations of the world. This eventuality is amplified by the statement that the Ethiopians and the Libyans will be at the king of the north's steps. meaning that they will come to him and willingly offer their service. Daniel was not the only prophet that saw this transfer of power take place. In Revelation 17, the prophet John also sees the nations of the earth willingly giving their power over to the papacy. In verses 12 and 13, it says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." This text lets us know that at some point there will be 10 entities that will eventually come together to give their power and strength to the papacy. It's important to note that based on the scenario outlined in Revelation 13, verse 3, which says that all the world will wonder after the beast, these 10 entities must necessarily represent the combining of worldwide power. This idea is not far-fetched at all, as a quick Google search will reveal that many already see the world as being divided into 10 regions, including the United Nations that produced this map highlighting the 10 regions of the world. Now, I have no idea exactly when and how this combining of forces will happen, but I do know that eventually it will happen. And when it does, these nations will have one mind, which means that they will be united, which means that they will be United Nations. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. The world will come together. They will give their power and strength to the beast, also known as the King of the North. It is in this sense that the King of the North will have control of the riches of Egypt, and the Ethiopians and the Libyans will be at his steps. This reality will be Satan's final attempt to coerce humanity into rejecting the commandments of God to embrace a false day of worship. And there is one group of people that will stand in his way, those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. We don't have to fear what's going to happen. Remember, just as God delivered Asa from the Ethiopians and the Libyans in the Old Testament, God will be with his people to deliver them. And in the next study, we'll take a look at verse 44 to find out how Daniel saw this spiritual war playing out. I hope to see you again for the next episode of Daniel 11:7.